The burning of Judas ceremony further strains Spanish-Israeli relations. A Holocaust Remembrance Day ceremony in Buchenwald is hijacked by pro-Palestinian protesters. Trump instigates a naval blockade, and a deep dive into the source of true strength. Stay tuned for all this and more in this week's edition of Israel Matters. I'm your host, Stephen Briggs. All Israel News reports that after a Spanish town burned an effigy of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu during an Easter festival last week, the Israeli government issued a strong rebuke to Spain. The incident took place in El Burjo during the traditional burning of Judas ceremony, where effigies of unpopular figures are destroyed. In previous years, figures such as Russian President Vladimir Putin and US President Donald Trump have been depicted, while this year's event featured, you guessed it, Netanyahu. El Burgo Mayor Maria Dolores Navarez defended the act, claiming it is an established tradition and intended as an anti-war protest. She said the 23-foot figure of Netanyahu was packed with 14 kilograms, 31 pounds of gunpowder and detonated during a festival attended by both locals and tourists. This is an anti-war message. Every year we choose a different figure that represents evil in our eyes, she stated. Well, let's watch the video of this appalling event in Spain now. For those of you listening on a podcast platform, please jump onto the Israel Matters YouTube channel, hit that like and subscribe button later to see this video that is playing of the burning of the effigy. Such a big crowd was out watching this event, and the Israeli embassy in Spain condemned the incident, saying the real evil is terror. This display of hatred is an act that incites violence. The appalling anti-Semitic hatred on display here is a direct result of Prime Minister Sanchez's government's systemic incitement, and even now the Spanish government remains silent. The International Christian Embassy of Jerusalem, ICEJ for sure, also condemned the display, noting that it represented a centuries-old tradition found in some Catholic and Orthodox communities that originated in medieval Europe, in which Jews are portrayed as greedy Christ killers or inherently evil. Such displays have no place in our modern world and should be universally banned by the Catholic Church, in keeping with the major reforms of the Vatican II Council. The International Christian Embassy in Jerusalem denounces this outrageous anti-Semitic display carried out during the most sacred celebration in the Christian calendar, that of Easter, the statement continued. We call upon the Catholic Church in Spain to issue a clear and unequivocal condemnation and apology for this reprehensible deviation from Christian teaching. Furthermore, we urge the Church of Rome to exercise moral leadership by instructing its global constituency to refrain from perpetrating such anti-Semitic practices in the future. Relations between the two countries, that's Israel and Spain, which have been tense as an understatement in the past, have deteriorated significantly since the Sanchez government came to power in 2018. And during the most recent Iran conflict, Spain closed its airspace to US aircraft, which was supporting the war effort against Iran. On Friday, Israel, with the support of the US, expelled the Spanish representatives from the US Civil Military Coordination Center in the Israeli town of Kiryat Gat, citing what they described as Madrid's obsessive anti-Israel bias. Netanyahu said the decision came after Spain has chosen repeatedly to stand against Israel. During the Iran war in early March, Spain withdrew its ambassador over the worsening ties. The country also imposed trade restrictions on Israeli products in January, and Prime Minister Sanchez has publicly accused Israel of being a genocidal state. I believe that God's promises in Genesis 12:3, however, are still in effect. We've made a whole film series, the Blessing, Curse, or Coincidence series, that outlines the rise and fall of nations, individuals, and empires based on whether they choose to bless or curse Israel. Historically, Spain, under the Spanish Inquisition, deteriorated after the way they treated the Jews in that time period. Let's pray for Spain in this time period that they will turn back towards God and come into alignment with his word and his purposes. Well, friends, In other news, Israel has just marked Yom HaShoah, its annual Holocaust Remembrance Day, which is a solemn occasion dedicated to honoring the memory of 6 million Jews murdered during the Holocaust. Across Israel, the day is observed with powerful moments of collective reflection, including a nationwide siren that brings daily life to a standstill. For 2 minutes, traffic halts, people step out of their cars, and the country pauses in silence. It's an enduring symbol of remembrance and unity. I've been in Jerusalem a number of times during these 2 minutes of sobering silence, and ceremonies were held at memorial sites such as Yad Vashem in Jerusalem, where survivors, leaders, and citizens gather to share testimonies, light memorial candles, and lay wreaths. As the number of living Holocaust survivors continues to decline globally, the importance of preserving their stories grows ever more urgent. Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Remembrance Day, serves not only as a day of mourning, but also as a reminder of the consequences of hatred and the responsibility to ensure that such atrocities are never repeated. Well, a controversial incident unfolded in Buchenwald concentration camp in Germany, where pro-Palestinian activists staged a demonstration despite a court order banning protests at the site. The planned vigil, organized by a group known as Kafirs in Buchenwald, coincided with events marking the anniversary of the camp's liberation in 1945. German authorities had prohibited the protest, arguing it could violate the dignity of Holocaust victims and the sanctity of the memorial, and had directed activists to gather instead in the nearby city of Weimar. Despite the ban, activists reportedly gathered near the memorial and drew criticism for linking the Holocaust to the current war in Gaza. Comparisons widely condemned by officials and Jewish organizations as inappropriate and offensive. Supporters of the protest argued they were highlighting modern-day injustices and honoring what they see as a broader legacy of fighting oppression. The incident has reignited tensions in Germany over free speech, historical memory, and how Holocaust sites should be used in contemporary political debates. Now, let's talk about where things are at in the war or quote-unquote ceasefire with Iran. This conflict, which involves primarily Iran, Israel, and the United States, but a number of other nations too, has entered a tense and uncertain phase following a fragile short-term ceasefire reached about a week ago. The agreement, brokered through international mediation, temporarily paused large-scale fighting and included provisions to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, a critical global oil route. However, that ceasefire has been shaky from the start, with disagreements over its terms and continued regional violence, including Israeli operations in Lebanon and Iranian-backed activity elsewhere, raising doubts about how long the truce can hold. I don't think it will hold. I think we'll see something unfold in the not-too-distant future. But at the center of the crisis in the Strait of Hormuz, where tensions have escalated dramatically, Iran had effectively restricted shipping through the waterway earlier in the conflict. And although limited traffic resumed during the ceasefire, shipping remains far below normal levels. In recent days, the US has imposed a naval blockade targeting Iranian oil exports, turning back ships and attempting to cut off Tehran's economic lifelines. Iran still exerts influence over the strait and has warned of retaliation, while conflicting reports suggest some vessels are still slipping through, highlighting how unstable and contested the situation remains. Let's watch a clip from the Israel guys explaining Trump's blockade and what the significance of this blockade is at this present moment in time.
As a result of the failed negotiations, Trump put out a very strong statement with a new, maybe even surprising plan. He posted this on Truth Social. I won't read the whole thing, but he said, quote, "Effective immediately, the United States Navy, the finest in the world, will begin the process of blockading any and all ships trying to enter or leave the Strait of Hormuz. At some point, we will reach an all being allowed to go in, all being allowed to go out basis, but Iran has not allowed that to happen by merely saying, there may be a mine out there somewhere that nobody knows about but them. This is world extortion, and leaders of countries, especially the United States of America, will never be extorted. I have also instructed our Navy to seek and interdict every vessel in international waters that has paid a toll to Iran. No one who pays an illegal toll will have safe passage on the high seas. We will also begin destroying the mines the Iranians laid in the straits." He went on to say, quote, "The blockade will begin shortly. Other countries will be involved with this blockade. Iran will not be allowed to profit off this illegal act of extortion. They want money, and more importantly, they want nuclear. Additionally, and at an appropriate moment, we are fully locked and loaded, and our military will finish up the little that is left of Iran." An Iranian armed forces spokesperson said that a U.S. restrictions on vessels in international waters is illegal and, quote, "amounts to piracy," and says Iran will decisively implement a permanent mechanism to control the Strait of Hormuz following a U.S. threat to block it, which is very ironic coming from Iran, of all countries. The IRGC said on Sunday that Iranian security forces have the Strait of Hormuz shipping bottleneck under their full control, warning that enemies would be trapped in a, quote, "deadly vortex" in the case of any miscalculation. The IRGC's Naval Command said on X after Trump ordered the blockade, quote, "All traffic is under the full control of the armed forces. The enemy will become trapped in a deadly vortex in the strait if it makes the wrong move." In a separate statement released by the IRGC's Public Relations Office, the force's Naval Command insisted that, quote, "Contrary to the false claims of some enemy officials, the Strait of Hormuz is open to the harmless passage of civilian vessels in compliance with specific relevant regulations." It didn't give full details on the nature of these rules, but they added, quote, "Any military vessels that intend to approach the Strait of Hormuz under any pretext will be considered in violation of the ceasefire and will be dealt with severely." So all of this will obviously have very major implications on the world stage. I guess we'll see how this plays out in the coming weeks, probably more like days, actually, and we'll see when this war actually starts up again. But a massive piece to all of this is that Iran laid mines in the Strait of Hormuz, and they seem to be the only ones who know where those mines actually are. That is, if they even know at all. So on Saturday, the U.S. Central Command confirmed that 2 guided missile destroyers entered the Strait of Hormuz to begin setting conditions for a massive mine-clearing operation, even though Tehran and Washington clashed over conflicting accounts of the transit. While CENTCOM reported the transit was completed without incident, the Iranian Foreign Ministry provided a different narrative. Tehran claimed it intercepted a U.S. destroyer traveling from the UAE and issued a 30-minute ultimatum to strike the vessel unless it turned back. Iranian officials said the ship complied and immediately relayed the incident to their delegation in Pakistan as a formal protest. Probably didn't happen. Here on the home front, in Israel, the IDF is preparing to resume operations against Iran at any moment. They have reportedly shifted into a protocol similar to those implemented in the days leading up to previous military campaigns. And just a little while ago, I saw Netanyahu said this. He said the ceasefire could end in a moment's notice.
As of now, diplomacy is under serious strain. Talks aimed at extending or expanding the ceasefire have stalled, even as officials signal that new negotiations could resume soon. Meanwhile, the ongoing blockade, threats of escalation, and unresolved military activity mean the region remains on edge. Most in Israel are keen for a decisive regime change in Iran and not just a ceasefire and false promises that kick the proverbial can down the road. Let's pray for the decision makers in this very significant moment in history, that they will have the courage and wisdom to accomplish all that the Lord desires to accomplish in Iran and the Middle East in this season. Well, I am privileged to be able to invite Dumisani Washington. He's a pastor, author, musician, and activist who serves as the founder and CEO of the Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel, or IBSI for short, a graduate of the San Francisco Conservatory of Music. He has worked extensively to build bridges between Black and Jewish communities, including his role as former diversity outreach coordinator for Christians United for Israel, where he helped mobilize multi-ethnic Christian support for Israel across the United States and internationally. He's also the creator of initiatives such as the Mizrahi Project and founder of the Hebrew Project Artists Blending Music and Advocacy, and is the author of Zionism and the Black Church. Alongside his professional work, he's a family man, married for decades with children and grandchildren, and continues to live out his mission through ministry, education, and cultural engagement. We had the privilege of being in Israel together for the Christian Media Summit, and were also both at an event in Nashville just a couple of months ago. You're going to love hearing from him. And we have a mutual friend that lives in the UK part-time and also in Addis, Pastor Abra Habte, who you were involved with, Dumisani, with the first Africa Young Leaders Conference. And I want to start there. What happened, and why did you feel called to bring about an Africa Young Leaders Conference in Addis Ababa?
Yes, sir. So yeah, great to be on with you. Thanks for having me. I met Dr. Abera Hapte, well, almost 10 years ago. About 2016, while I was on staff with Christians United for Israel. As you know, they have a summit, a national summit it's international summit actually. And he came from Ethiopia or from the UK, wherever he was leaving from that time. And we met then. And then my first trip to Ethiopia was 2017, the year after we met. So we have been talking and communicating since then, but over the last year, kind of have ramped that up as he's continued to strengthen Ethiopia Christians' ties with Israel. Very, very strong evangelical voice there. Of course, as you know, the head of El Shaddai Television Ministries. And so we have been co-hosting events over the past year, and the last one just happens to be the Young Leaders Conference that was in Addis Ababa back in February. And of course, we'll be doing part two or the second annual one in Jerusalem next February. So he's a great guy.
Fantastic. Well, let's start with hearing more about you. Who is Dumisani? What is his heart? What is his heartbeat, his passion? I've had been tremendously grateful to hear you speak. I know you're a passionate guy, and I want people to catch the vision that you have.
Well, so my Israel journey started, depending on where you clock it from, right? I've been active in this space since probably around 2011, 2012, but even more so after my first trip in 2012 to Israel. That was in December on Hanukkah. I was one of the African American pastors with Christians United for Israel. I just happened to go, already had a love for Israel, but I'd never been to the modern state, never visited the land before until then. And in doing so, among other things, God just placed on my heart to return home and strengthen the tie between the Black and Jewish communities, as well as Israel Africa. There's always been a very strong Africa element to the work that we do. So I didn't know how I was going to do that. Wasn't really sure. Started reading, kind of compiling some information and everything. Some things I was aware of. I had to do a much deeper dive. And we started the Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel around the summer of 2013. It was partially inspired by an organization that was started in 1975 by civil rights leaders, A. Philip Randolph, Byron Rustin, and others, called BASIC, Black Americans to Support Israel Communities. As a matter of fact, we talk about that in some of our materials. People can go to our website and they can check out, read about that. They can try to watch videos on those types of things, ibsi.org. And so, yeah, this was part of my journey, the later stages of this journey now that has me basically traveling. If I'm not in the United States, I'm in Africa. If I'm not there, I'm in Israel. So there's a triangle that's kind of there going almost all the time. So that was the geopolitical part of it, as well as ministry, right? We are not a Christian organization, but of course I'm a pastor, and so much of what we do is just based on the Word of God as the foundation, and then we deal with all the other issues that pertain to this very vast subject when it comes to Israel and Africa. We say in our organization, the first Israel-Africa summit was when the Queen of Sheba visited Solomon in Jerusalem 3,000 years ago. And that was an official thing happening there, but it was also a prophetic thing that was happening there. And we see it's resonating now more than ever before with all these events taking place. Africa, of course, is at the hub of it, from the positive in terms of the Israel relations to the not positive with the rise in Islamic terrorism. And the number one spot is Africa, unfortunately, where that is actually happening.
So that's fascinating. Of course, most people don't tend to look at the book as being a book that has a tremendous amount of African involvement. And I want to kind of touch on that because I think that people, when they read the book of Exodus, they don't realize, or they hear the word Egypt, but they don't really put it in its full context. How does placing Moses and the Exodus story within an African context reshape our biblical understanding?
Well, it's interesting because it corrects our biblical understanding. I mean, Sinai is in Africa. It was thousands of years ago, and it still is, right? So Israel becomes a nation in Africa, right? They actually receive the Torah in the Sinai. They are slaves for 430 years in Egypt. So all this happens there. Not to mention, in fact, all you Bible students out there, when Jesus is being threatened as a child, the angel tells them to take his child down into Egypt, right? So these, as you know, Stephen, these places are landlocked. It's not like an ocean that survives. You can like walk by foot. I wouldn't recommend it to to Egypt across the border, especially right now with Hamas and everything there. But for thousands of years, right? I've met Africans over the years who said nothing about driving, walking, anything from Africa. It was nothing to go throughout the continent from one end to the other. And so this has always been the case. Israel is located on the continent tip between Northeast Africa and Southwest Asia, right? This is all. It has been the most contested area of real estate in the history of man, right? And you have all the continents are connected to it, right? You have Europe, the Mediterranean going right there. You have Africa, and you have Asia, right? So all these are connected. As a matter of fact, after the Romans destroyed the temple, and then later on put down the last remaining rebellion, the Bar Kokhba rebellion, as you know, like 136 or so AD, what they do with the Jews that they didn't kill, they carted them off to Africa, Europe, and Asia, right? That's how, because it's right in the middle. All they had to do is take their ships this way, that way. So there's been an Africa connection for a long time, and I only halfway talk about the Africa-Israel summit. I want to tell people that after David writes in Psalm 68, princes shall come out of Egypt, Ethiopia shall soon stretch out her hands to God. He's talking about the relationship, the gift, the tribute, the marching to Zion, as it were, which is why when the Queen of Sheba comes and visits David's son Solomon, it's not coincidence. Oh, and by the way, Jesus brings it up again in Matthew chapter 12 and in the Luke chapter 11, the Queen of the South coming to see Solomon. Why is Jesus talking about Africa? That's how important Africa has always been to the story.
And you mentioned within that Ethiopia being a key component of that, the Queen of Sheba, and obviously there's been the return with Operation Moses. And for those of our listeners that have no idea what Operation Moses is, can you share a little bit about that? Share a bit about how the Ethiopian Jews challenged common perceptions on Jewish identity as well?
Because the Jewish people have been scattered, as you know, for millennia around the world. One of the most ancient communities would be Ethiopia, that entire region. And please also, for Bible students, understand that when the Bible says Ethiopia or Kush, it's talking about a much broader region than we understand today as a smaller state of Ethiopia. It's talking about what we would consider Africa, Tanzania, Uganda, all those regions. But having said that, yes, that community has been there for thousands of years. And the airlifting in 1984 was the official bringing of the Ethiopian Jews home to Israel, just like the Jews who left Poland, the Jews who left Peru, and literally the four corners of Isaiah said the four corners of the earth in Isaiah chapter 11 for a reason. Why? Because the Jews scattered to the four corners of the earth from Africa, Asia, Europe, North and South America. And so it was a daring rescue. It was one of the most celebrated ones because of when it happened, 1984. It just so happens to be my senior year of high school. I graduated in 1985. So the fall of my senior year, I see it on TV. Now, real quick story. I had no idea what I was looking at. I knew nothing about the modern state of Israel. I grew up in church, sung about Israel and Moses, and all those things were more spiritual in my mind. But when I saw Black Jews kissing the ground at Ben Gurion Airport, or a Black woman with her baby tied around her waist, and this Black Ethiopian Jew, I didn't know what I was looking at until later on. See, okay, well, that was happening then. Israel takes these people who step out of the pages of the Bible, just like they did with the Jews in Yemen, right? Airlift them out of in Sudan, and understand because why? They had to cross the border because they were being so persecuted in Ethiopia. They crossed the desert into Sudan, which is out of the frying pan into the fire, because the Sudanese didn't want Jews in their country either. And Israel coordinates with these very, very brave. I'll say this last thing. I could talk all day long about it. But the bravery of the Ethiopian Jews and the Israeli officers, the Mossad agents, right, the military, to do this, they're risking everything. People understand this is the power of Zionism. Jews separated from their homeland for thousands of years, willing to risk their life. And some 4,000 Ethiopian Jews perished in this trek. People don't understand. Many of them gave their lives trying to do what? Go back to Zion.
Yeah, it is. It's a remarkable thing. I was in Addis in 2013. It was a tremendous privilege to be there. And while I was there, I'll tell you a side note, but I think it's very, very crucial for people to kind of see and grapple the significance of what God is doing in Africa. Yeah. I was there. We'd had a conference. It was actually the first Christians, Friends of Israel, Ethiopia conference with Pastor Abra, who you mentioned earlier. And just before I was leaving to the airport, all of these different people came from different nations. I could tell they weren't from Ethiopia. I was like, what are you doing here? It was the week before the African Union was meeting. Yes. And they had come in from a whole host of nations, and they said, we're coming to undo in the spirit to pray, because it was the 50th anniversary, is that right, 1973 to 2013, yeah, fifth anniversary of the African Union instructing its member states to sever ties with Israel because of the Yom Kippur War.
Yes, yes.
And so they were there to pray before the African Union was meeting. And of course, that was where it was decided where African nations cut ties with Israel. Some did it publicly, some did it privately. But the resulting consequences on the nations that cut off ties, sever ties with Israel, it wasn't a good few decades following on from that. And the question is it mere coincidence, or is there more to it, more to that history? Well, since that point in 2013, the relationship between Africa and Israel has blossomed tremendously. The leadership of Israel has been to Africa more times than all of the years previously put together from that up to 2013. I mean, from 1948 to 2013, there were very few visits. 1973 onwards, of course, it was a very different story. So it's been remarkable to see that unfolding. And I don't know if you want to comment on that.
Yeah, if I can use this word, it's prophetic. This is the reason why we quoted Psalm 68, Zephaniah 3, from beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, my daughter shall bring forth my offering. Acts chapter 8, the Ethiopian Jew, he gets saved, he gets baptized. I mean, over and over and over, there's this theme that's there, right? Ethiopia is one of the nations, or Cush is mentioned more times than any other nations with the exception of Israel and Egypt, right? You can see it over and over again. So this is how important it is. So what we're seeing right now in our lifetime, Stephen, is a re-emphasis on what is really a God call, which is why Jesus even referred to it in terms of the last days. He said, okay, Africa did this, and so now Africa will judge the nations. The queen of the south will then rise up in the judgment against this generation, for she came from the ends of the earth, right? So he's actually making both a prophetic and a messianic claim to what she actually did. And this is what we're seeing now. So yeah, you're absolutely right. Over these last decade plus, there has been an explosion of Africa-Israel relations like never before. As of a couple of years ago, 83% of the continent, 83% has some sort of diplomatic ties with Israel, including South Africa, which has a very hostile government that against Israel. Still, they has never spoken for the majority of South Africans when it comes to their ties with Israel or their feelings about the Jewish people.
It is. It's remarkable. God is doing something in Africa. You're a part of it and hearing what's going on there. And if you want to see some footage from Operation Moses, you can go and visit our website and see Jerusalem, the Covenant City. We actually had original source footage from there. Natan Sharansky welcoming them back. It was a flight that was very significant in that it left, and actually by the time it had arrived, there was an additional passenger on board because somebody actually gave birth on the plane during the trip, which is quite remarkable in and of itself. And now you've been inspired and have written a book called Zionism and the Black Church, and I it's an area that I don't know a huge amount about, and I'm eager to learn more about. So what inspired you to write it, and what's your core message in and through it?
After that first trip to Israel that I took in 2000, so as a matter of fact, I started working on the sketch of the book maybe about a year before I went to Israel, 2011. After that trip, I was encouraged to kind of to finish it. And so it was just on my heart to speak of both historically, the relationship between the Black and the Jewish communities, as we were just sharing now about Israel and Africa. And it felt the importance of it was looming for me. What I have found out then, so I wrote the book Zionism and Black Church. The subtitle is Why Standing with Israel Will Be a Defining Issue for Christians of Color in the 21st Century. Again, I had never written a book before. It was just on my heart to do, so I didn't think I was some great author who's going to now espouse on da da da. But it was really a God thing. It was really on my heart. And so it talks about history. It talks about music. There's a great deal of music that's there. That talks about the Negro spirituals that were written during the time of the slave trade here in the United States. Go Down Moses, Joshua at the Battle of Jericho, songs that are very popular worldwide now that came out of those struggles and almost always set in the Jewish Tanakh, right? In the New Testament as well, but mostly set in the Old Testament as these biblical characters. This whole God's relationship with the Hebrews was often a parallel for Black leaders when it came to coming through slavery, coming through Jim Crow era, all those types of things. And so in writing about that, what I also try to do, Stephen, is use those things as a context historically, but deal with how there has been a particular effort by Israel's enemies, as you just mentioned, 1973, to sever ties with Africa, right? There's always been a very direct, and the whole PLO, the reason when they brought Yasser Arafat in 1969, because as you know, started in 64, and released him towards the black community, because people ask, what was that for? People often don't realize it, is to show people fraudulently that Israel is some sort of racist apartheid regime. Well, it doesn't really work until you can get people who are black to try to co-sign on that. So that has been the thing. And the irony, oh, by the way, not only is Israel not an apartheid state, but there are still some 2 million African slaves throughout the Arab Islamic world. But we don't want to talk about that, right? Let's talk about Israel being the right. So that has been the case. And unfortunately, Stephen, as you and I both know, that propaganda has worked, which is why you had children on college campuses, most of whom are not black, who are standing for Hamas, right? Who are actually, after October 7th happens, by the 9th and 10th on these campuses, these kids are cheering Hamas. Why? Because they think that standing with Hamas or standing with the quote-unquote Palestinians is a civil rights issue. How did that happen? It happened with the exploitation of my community, right? By now, 50, 60 years later, it's become just a given that Israel's this, oppressive, racist regime. None of those things are true, but that perception was made powerful by the KGB formation of the PLO coming at our community. So my book outlines those types of things so that people can see and hopefully give them a path forward.
So why do you think so many people struggle to see the connection between Zionism and the black church? What is it that hinders people from actually understanding this reality?
Basically not understanding history. If they really understood, just read the Bible, right? I mean, it's actually in the scriptures. I remember years ago, I was talking to a pastor friend. This was 20-something years ago, and we were having a conversation around Israel, Africa, and he didn't realize some of what we're talking about, just the easiness of it. Right here it is, it's right before you. And wherever we were talking, there was a world map on the wall. And he looked up and he saw Africa. They saw Israel. He said, I never realized that this is not like 100 miles literally over the side of that fence, right? So at that point, even though he was arguing against the whole Africa thing, he's realizing that, no, there's been this thing. Ladies and gentlemen, Abraham's servant and friend was Eleazar, who was a Cushite, right? I can go on and on and on, right? It's not like they didn't know who each other's were. This was always, Africa had always played a major, major role when it came to Israel and will in the redemption. This is the reason why in Zephaniah 3, it says, from beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, my daughters, my suppliants will bring back my offering. God continues to underscore Africa in the redemption, not as if there's no other lands. No, what he's saying is that Africa is going to play a pivotal role. People not knowing the scriptures, right? And then the distortion of history, right? This is all the point. This is, for just quick example, this is why in the West, most Westerners are unaware, Stephen, as you know, of Jews that are not Ashkenazi or don't look obviously European, right? I mean, somebody could be Ashkenazi and have lighter skin or darker skin, you know that, but they'll see Jews and they'll think Jerry Seinfeld, right? They'll think Steven Spielberg, and again, they're Jewish. Not like they're not Jewish. They don't think Ethiopian Jew, Yemeni Jew, Jew from Kaifeng, China, or from India, right? For them, those are just exotic Jews. And for the Jewish people who know their history, like, no, those are Jews. This is why the power of going to Israel. You walk around Jerusalem, Jews are black, they're white, they're Asian, Hispanic, right? And the Israelis think nothing about it, right? They know, oh, you goofy Westerners, you guys are the ones who are like freaking out about the fact that these Jews, all these different Jews, are like, oh, no, that's us as a people. That most of Westerners, don't know that story.
And it's quite remarkable, isn't it? I mean, we live in a multicultural world that people embrace that in regions, and yet they think that doesn't apply to Israel as a nation. I mean, the Mizrahi Jews, the Indian Jews, it's one of the most amazing places for food, as you said earlier on. This is really where Europe, Asia, Africa converge, and it's centered in Jerusalem for a reason. God put his name there. He brings every tribe, tongue, nation, and people to be a part of his family. And that's really quite exciting. I'm looking forward to the full expression of that being expressed in the church.
Absolutely.
And the notion really of, and let's help our listeners, spiritual Zionism or biblical Zionism, how has that shaped the black church tradition, and how do those intertwine? Because
these things have always been there, right? You've never had an Israelite or Hebrew people without telling the story that involves Africa as well. It's been nothing new. It's always been the case. Which is why we talked about how Moses has been talked about universally for millennia, right? His as a figure, not just the leader of Israel and the giver of the Torah, as you will, but this actual iconic person of who Israel actually is. So it's funny, in the Jewish tradition, Moses is the central figure. In the Christian tradition, Jesus is the central figure, right? But in both traditions, Moses is venerated because why? He's the first shepherd of Israel. He's the first pastor, rabbi of Israel, right? So that has always been the case in the Black church, which is why I referenced for a moment ago, centuries earlier, the beginning of what we call the Negro spirituals. To this day, Black Americans or people in the African diaspora still sing about Zion. Bob Marley was famous, among many other things, singing about Jerusalem, right? Singing about Zion. Lauryn Hill, one of the most famous hip hop artists pictured in the 90s, her seminal album, Miseducation of Lauryn Hill, Zion, Jerusalem, Israel, right? Why? Because it's been such in the Black American and African diaspora DNA and ethos that when you're talking about Israel, and again, for people who are listening to this, nothing to do with the political part of it. This has nothing to do with the state of Israel in that sense. We're talking about now something that transcends that spiritually, that when they're recognizing they're singing of Jerusalem, they're singing of Zion, that very, very famous Psalm 137, how can we sing the Lord's song in a strange land? Black Americans and other people in the African diaspora took that literally. Our gospel music, which is known all over the world, which came out of the spirituals, which also from where came the jazz and rhythm and blues. This was the foundation of American music. That music is done hip hop. Hip hop came out of the same cultural reality, has always been fused with Black church mentality. Even for those who don't consider themselves churchgoers, that has always been a part of the culture.
So let's talk about somebody that people, you think of the African-American Black culture, you think of Martin Luther King. He's part of, and he had a big part to play. He used a lot of biblical imagery like Moses and the Promised Land in his messages. And what his support, though, he had a real support for Israel, didn't he, that was often overlooked or misunderstood. Tell us a little bit about that.
It was such a support that it drove Israel's enemies absolutely crazy. It really, really did, because here's this progressive leader, and he's speaking truth to power. He's doing the whole nonviolent struggle. He's getting arrested and all types of things. And a lot of people consider him a rabble rouser. So quick fun fact: he was assassinated in 1968. His disapproval rating was 75%. Disapproval from the Black and the white community. They didn't like the fact that he spoke against the Vietnam War. So this guy was an enigmatic figure for many people, right? But here's the thing. He spoke boldly of his stand for Israel, his coming against anti-Semitism. And so for some of the other folks who consider themselves radical, that used to drive them crazy. This was a not just a staple in terms of his ideology throughout the Black civil rights community and the Black community. Again, the overwhelming majority of Black Americans would have agreed on everything because they were speaking for us when it came to Israel, understanding Israel's, biblical significance and our relationship with the Jewish people, all those things. So Dr. King, one of the most powerful things about his Israel advocacy, if you will, was because not only was it during the height of the civil rights movement, that era that started from the 50s going to the 60s, and now it was also, Stephen, coming at a time in which the Arab-Palestinian narrative was beginning to gain traction among the younger, what they call the more militant members of the civil rights movement, which would be like the Stokely Carmichaels and the Angela Davises and the Eldridge Cleaver and the Black Panthers. These were the younger ones. They considered Dr. King and some of the other ones the old guard, even though Dr. King was only 39 years old. But when you're in your late teens, 20s, 39 is old, Stephen, right? So they didn't like that. And they were also being fed a poison pill by the communists that the Jews are your enemies, right? Just like you're facing racism in the United States, those fake, quote unquote, Jews, for those who are listening, I'm doing air quotes, I'm not calling fake Jews there. They call them fake Jews. And they said they're really interlopers from Europe and they've come to steal Arab-Palestinian land. It was a lie then. It's still a lie, but it was a lie that was repeated over and over and over again. Dr. King and his colleagues stood as the bulwark against that lie, but we see how that lie has persisted throughout history, throughout the society.
And his relationship with leaders like Abraham Joshua Heschel had influenced his view, didn't it? What was that relationship, and how can we learn from having solid relationships with people of different backgrounds, different heritage? How can that develop and improve our understanding of the world?
Joshua Heschel wrote a book about the prophets, and it was said that Dr. King was seen with that book often, right? So they had respect for each other's faith tradition, and there was no qualms around that, right? And so it was, again, I need to make this very, very clear to people. In as much as those two men were working together and they were iconic figures out of both of their communities, they were not the genesis of it. It was already there. It's just that it went to another level. It's almost like Michael Jordan, he didn't start the NBA, but he just took the NBA here, right? They didn't start Black Jews. Black Jewish synergy, if you want to have a clocking period, would be the early 1900s with Julius Rosenwald and Booker T. Washington, right? Who were working together to build Rosenwald schools before Dr. King was even born, right? He wasn't born until 1929, right? So this actually was a real thing. Jews who came to this country, fleeing places like, Nazi Europe, but also fleeing places like Russia, even before Nazi Europe, saying to them, we understand what you're going through. They came to the United States, very grateful to be here, the freedoms and everything, but they saw the different America that Black people experienced, and the Jews said, we get that. We know what that is. That's where that synergy actually came from. So there was a great deal of respect for Joshua Heschel in that tradition throughout the Black community.
And if you want to know more about the Jews fleeing Russia and fleeing Europe, in our film America and the Israel Effect, we go into that in a little bit of detail, how they came. Actually, some of the Jews went to Brazil and Argentina and came up from there to Ellis Island, and the whole story. It's quite an amazing story of what shaped America and its culture to this day. So America and the Israel Effect, you can there's a link below. If you click on that link, you can watch that film in its entirety for free. And incidentally, Dumisani, our next film that we've got in order of the Blessing Curse Coincidence films is titled Africa and the Israel Effect, and we're looking at the unfolding of that relationship for Tanzania, Uganda, Egypt, and the like. You'd be very interested to get more of your thoughts on that. But I want to turn our attention a little bit to kind of these words that are used in society. We have them used very flippantly, almost: justice, peace, and equality, and how they kind of are spun to be almost propaganda-esque in their style. How can people discern when words are being used in the correct way, not in a way that manipulates? I heard the phrase, and I think it's a very apt one, that linguistic theft happens quite often in our culture. A word that used to mean one thing now means another. And we see that with justice, peace, equality, and other trigger words, shall we say, like genocide, which is one we alluded to earlier. The net population of Gazans has increased, or Palestinians has increased dramatically since over the years. It's not genocide going on. So justice, peace, equality. How can people discern when terms like justice, peace, and equality are being used as propaganda?
So there was an article that was written by Bayard Rustin, who's one of the founders of BASIC, Black Americans to Support Israel Committee. He wrote in 1975. People, they can go to our website and they can read it. I'll send you the link as well. But the title of the article was "The PLO, Freedom Fighters or Terrorists?" The reason I'm citing that article is because here it is, 50 plus years ago, he was addressing the very thing you're asking me now. He was saying we are living in a time when words no longer mean anything, right? He said the Palestine Liberation Organization is a terrorist organization. They use the word liberation because of KGB disinformation. And Yasser Arafat is calling himself a freedom fighter. He's like, you've completely taken words. They have no meaning now. He is slaughtering men, women, and children, Israelis and Palestinians. He has set himself up as the leader. No one elected him. Nobody asked him. He was born in Cairo, Egypt. He's no more Palestinian than you and me, Stephen, right? But here he comes in there and he's marching in there under the same Nazi mentality of the Grand Mufti a generation before him, which is to work with the Nazis to kill the Jews in Europe, kill the Jews in Israel, right? That was the whole point. My point being, the PLO chose the verbiage of freedom, liberation, justice, these words that are very, very powerful. They have great meaning, but when they're spoken by people who are doing the opposite, so to answer your question, it's not, Jesus said a tree is known by its fruit. If I'm standing talking about justice, equality, and peace and everything, and I'm slaughtering children, I'm strapping bombs to 10-year-olds, and I'm sending them to shopping malls, I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen, that's not very, very difficult. That person's not about justice. The person's not about freedom or peace. That person is about terrorism and destruction. Yes. Now, do we have to fight? Yes. At the end of the day, unfortunately, someone's attacking me. I have to respond to that. But that's not what the PLO was ever doing. It wasn't the Jews attacking Arabs. It was the other way around. This is why you got something like the Hebron massacre of 1929, ladies and gentlemen. What happened with that? Why? Well, because the Grand Mufti was telling everyone that the Jews were trying to take the mosque. Right? The same thing, mind you, 1929, almost 20 years before the state of Israel is even reborn, right? Why? They stirred up this whole controversy and they slaughtered about 100 plus Jews, both in Hebron and Jerusalem. Why? Because there's been this hatred for the Jewish people, right? The flipping part happened after the state of Israel is now reborn. It refuses to die in these wars, right? 1948, 1956, 1967. The Jews are suffering casualties, but they're saying, look, this is our home. So then the Arab powers and the Soviet Union turn the tides. They flip the script and they said, oh, here's the real thing. These Jews have stolen land. They're colonizers. They're imperialists. And I'll say this last thing. I'll stop talking. They've been calling Jews imperialists. I told my Jewish friends, you guys are the worst imperialists I've ever met in my life. You have this tiny strip of land. You've had a tiny strip of land since 1948, and you haven't expanded. Don't you guys know? And of course, I'm joking, because they're not imperialists. They're imperialists. They'd be planting Israeli flags all over the place. No, but where are their Arab Islamic quote unquote flags? ISIS, Al Qaeda, Hezbollah, Islamic Jihad, the most dangerous place to be a Christian right now, Boko Haram in Nigeria. That's where we see imperialism, right? That's where we see slavery and jihad, all of these things. This is the age we live in. So how people know, Stephen, they have to be willing to have what I call moral courage. Listen to what the person is saying, and then watch what he's doing. If those two things don't line up, ladies and gentlemen, we have a problem.
Absolutely. And where we are seeing the portrayal of these things, that I'm reminded of the opening of John. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. You know, the reality of words matter. That's why Israel matters, words matter, the Bible matters, because words are what shape our understanding of everything around us. And so when these words are hijacked or reinterpreted, it doesn't change the value of the word, but it follows from a biblical perspective. Isn't it any wonder that actually the word himself is being attacked? People don't want the word to be. It's why it's referred to, and people use it as a blasphemy. They use it as a curse word, and yet the reality is that is the word that can save, can redeem, and can set free. Why do you believe that some leaders and black leaders in the community have been influenced so by misleading narratives about Israel? You've talked a little bit about the history. You mentioned the Hebron massacre, the Forsaken Promise film, which again I'll put a link in the description below, shows and has eyewitness testimonies of what took place in Hebron and goes into great detail. If you want to see a shortened version of that, Betrayal of the Jews is one of the full-length films that we have on the YouTube channel at Israel Matters. You can see all of those details of what took place with Hajj Amin al-Husseini, who you mentioned, the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem. But what is it that's influenced the misleading narratives that we hear and that we see within the leaders of the Western world?
Well, mostly just like your previous question, the twisting of narrative, the changing of words. So I mentioned Bayard Rustin in the article that he wrote about the PLO, freedom fighters. Well, he also referred to the 1974 UN General Assembly address by Yasser Arafat. And I write it out in my book, and people can Google it as well. Arafat spoke for however long he spoke up at the podium, the same way that, for example, al-Jilani, the quote-unquote president of Syria, was just at the UN here in New York not too long ago, right? Same thing. He's a terrorist, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and he's talking about justice, freedom, how Israel's a bad guy, right? This has been going on for... He's doing it because the playbook has already been written, right? And why was Arafat standing at the podium of the United Nations saying, we want justice, we want peace, we want liberty, and Israel's the bad, and Zionism is the bad? Why was he doing that? He was reshaping the narrative. Now, like the Jedi mind trick, it only works on people who don't know what's actually going on. But again, the power of propaganda is that, especially if you have access to the media, you, like Joseph Goebbels, keep saying the same thing over and over and over again. And what Bayard Rustin said was that even in Arafat's address that he listened to in real time, he knew he was lying. He said, but he kept calling Israel a racist state so many times. Other black leaders, he said, who knew, they started to buckle, he said. They even started to go, well, maybe he's like, no, the fact that he keeps saying that Israel's a racist state doesn't make it true. It just means he keeps saying it so that you're mine, right? So this really is, I love what Paul said, and be not conformed to this world, but be transformed, what he say? By the renewing of your minds, right? This really is the spiritual battleground begins here, right? That's why David said, thy word have I hid in my heart that I might not sin against thee. There has to be some sort of bulwark in a person's mind and heart to keep them from getting sucked into I'll tell this quick story, right? So real quick, I swear I'll do this like 20 seconds. I have a young Jewish friend years ago, he's in college, and he was doing a lot of advocacy on campus, right? He had another friend who used to work with him, as a young lady. She spent the last summer in Jordan helping in Arab Palestinian the camps, the displaced camp. What are they called? The
refugee camp.
Thank you, sir. Yeah. So she went there. So she comes back after that time, and she tells him, I'm no longer doing advocacy with you. He said, why? She said, because I've seen the refugees, right? He said, but you know the real story. Yeah, but I've seen them. No joke. She said, I know it's a lie. I know how Israel's being attacked, but my heartstrings were pulled, and now I believe that Israel's bad. Now, that's how them wrap your brain around that, right? The facts had not changed. She knew why they were refugees. She knew the billions of dollars that was going into help them. That's being in Qatar and Saudi Arabia and all those things. She knew all of those things, Stephen. But when she saw the pain, she pivoted to Israel because all the propaganda. And when he told me, I was blown away. That's what's been happening for years now. People, either they don't know or they do know, but they think, like Thomas Sowell said, instead of thinking they feel, and they get pulled into their hearts.
Yeah. The heart is deceitful,
Yes.
I think is what the scriptures say, doesn't it? So
100%.
it's very, very important. So your Zionism, the Black Church, where can people get hold of it? And what would you say is your passion or the key takeaway that you want people to gain from reading your book?
They should go to ibsi.org and then click on store. You'll see the book there that's in. We'll sell it there. But also they should know there's the paperback edition, but there's an audio book. It's on all the audio digital things you can get from Amazon, those type of things. Zionism and the Black Church. Make sure they get the second edition because the first edition shouldn't be available anymore, but just in case it's the first edition. And so the key takeaway, again, whether they're Black Americans or Africans or whoever they are reading the book, I want them to be informed and have a path forward. The final chapter of the book is literally talks about where do we go from here? What do we do now? We'll have all this information and how they can, as Black pastors and leaders, forge those relationships with rabbis and other Jewish leaders in the community, that type of thing. But I want them to, again, be informed, right? Knowledge is power. My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge, right? But also know how to move forward, have a blueprint. Here's an idea of what we need to do now that we know these things, right? That's what our hope is from the book. Thankfully, people who read it, we've always been self-published, but it's gotten a lot of positive reviews, and we're grateful for that because at least it seems to have positively impacted the people who've read it. So I hope people can check it out.
Well, thank you, Dumisani, for your time. And you can connect with Dumisani in the description notes below and find out all about IBSI and everything that they are doing. And, of course, get your hands on a copy of Zionism and the Black Church. We'll put a link in there from the Amazon book as well to get hold of that. So thank you, Dumisani. Have a blessed rest of your day. And we're going to turn our attention to looking at the word Oz, which is where we get the word in Hebrew for strength. There's much talk in the headlines today about nations showing strength through military might. And there's a Hebrew word that appears again and again throughout the scriptures. It's a word that speaks not just of power, but of something deeper, something that is enduring. That word is Oz. It is often translated as strength, but in the Hebrew mind, it means far more than physical ability or human effort. Oz is strength that comes from God himself. When we hear the word strength today, we often think of independence or pushing harder, striving more, holding everything together by sheer will. But the scriptures present a very different picture. We're told in Psalm 62, verse 11, that power belongs to God. And in Psalm 29, verse 11, that the Lord will give strength to his people. This tells us something that is foundational. Strength is not something we produce, it's something we receive. The Hebrew word Oz carries the idea of firmness, of might, and unshakable power. It is not fleeting strength or emotional energy, but enduring covenantal strength, the kind that holds you steady when everything else is shaking. And that is why David can say in Psalm 28, verse 7-8, "The Lord is my strength and my shield. The Lord is the strength of his people." Notice he does not simply say that God gives strength, but that God himself is strength. And this is the heart of Oz. It is not just something God hands to you, it is something he becomes for you. Because of this, Scripture invites us not only to receive strength, but to seek it relationally. In 1 Chronicles 16, verse 11, we are told, "Seek the Lord and his strength." You see, strength is not found in striving, but in turning our hearts towards him again and again. There is also a beautiful connection between strength and the presence of God. Psalm 96, verse 6 declares that strength and beauty are in his sanctuary. And this means that Oz is not just something God gives at a distance, it is something that is encountered in his presence. And as we draw near to him in worship, we step into a place where strength and glory dwell together. And this becomes even more powerful because the strength of God is not distant or abstract. It is revealed, embodied, and made accessible through Messiah. When we walk in relationship with him, we are not drawing from our own reserves. We are living from his strength within us. And this is why the new covenant can say, I can do all things through him who strengthens me. The same God to whom all power belongs now works his strength within his people. And this changes everything, because it means that when you feel weak, when your strength is gone, and when you don't have what it takes, you, friend, are not disqualified. You are actually positioned. You are in the very place where God's strength can meet you. The world tells us to be strong on our own, but Scripture invites us into something better. Not self-reliance, but God-reliance. Not temporary power, but lasting strength. Not pressure to perform, but grace to endure. Again and again, the call is the same. Seek him, trust him, draw near to him, because Oz strength is not achieved, it is received. And in 1 Samuel 17 verse 45, David said to the Philistine, you come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of Adonai Zevaot, the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. David courageously and wisely chose not to compare himself to Goliath, but rather to compare Goliath to the Almighty Lord who rules above any army. David knew his ability to face Goliath was not about his own strength, or even Goliath's strength, but about the Lord's strength and ability. So today, friends, instead of asking, do I have enough strength? Ask a better question. Am I seeking the Lord and his strength? Because Oz is more than strength. It is the power of God made available to his people, his presence sustaining you, his life working within you. And in Messiah, that strength is not far away. It's near, it's present, and it's yours to receive. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments on today's show. You can connect with Dumisani's website and his book through the notes below. Take a moment to like, subscribe, and share. It really does help us get the message of Israel Matters out further and wider. Let's stand together and use our voice and influence to combat anti-Semitism and to point people to the Lord and his word. Israel Matters is a listener-supported show, so please continue supporting the ministry through the links in the description for this, the 50th episode. I can't believe we've done 50 episodes already, to help us make it possible for us to continue to make timely biblical content that encourages the saints all over the world. Thank you for joining today. I'm Stephen Briggs, and this is Israel Matters.